George in New York, site of an infamous battle in the French and Indian War, and today a major tourist destination in upstate New York. So the Adirondack Mountains are behind me. You can see the leaves are already changing color. The French and Indian War is sometimes called the First World War, since it took place in North America, the Caribbean, the Philippines, India, Europe, truly all over the world. Ultimately, the British would defeat the French, but it would not come without sacrifice, such as the battle here at Lake George at Fort William Henry. In August 1757, a six-day siege would begin here at Fort William Henry. French troops, several thousand, along with about 1,200 native allies, would besiege the 300 or so men that lived inside of this fort. They held out as best they could, but ultimately they simply couldn't resist such a larger force and surrendered. The French commander wanted to be generous to them, and so atypically allowed the captured British soldiers to keep all of their possessions and allowed them to return to British lines the next day. That is, all their possessions except their valuable black powder, very hard to come by in the war. So this all seemed like good news for the British soldiers who were forced to surrender. Unfortunately for them, the next day, as they tried to return to British lines, the French native allies attacked them. You see, the French native allies weren't being paid by the French army. They were paid in the spoils of war. Anything that was captured in battle, the natives were allowed to keep. Now, if the French allowed the captured British to keep all their possessions, that means there was no pay for the natives. The natives didn't care much for that, so they attacked and massacred the 200 or so retreating British soldiers. This was fictionalized in James Fenimore Cooper's book, The Last of the Mohicans. So, sadly, this battle came to a very bad end for the participating British soldiers. I'm inside of the crypt at Fort William Henry, and you can see down here a picture of skeletal remains. Now, this is where 5 skeletons were actually discovered by archaeologists, and their bones were on display until 1993. Behind me are the ruins of Fort George, which actually was constructed in 1759 after the Battle of Lake George ended in defeat. But at that time, it was home to an entrenched camp, vastly inferior to Fort William Henry, but actually home to more soldiers. There was about 1,200 soldiers living here that was also besieged by the French, and when the fort surrendered, this place surrendered as well. The men living here would also be caught up in the attack by the Hurons, the French native allies, as they tried to return to British lines after their surrender to the French. So, why was the Battle of Lake George significant? Why even build a fort here? Well, Lake George may not look very far from side to side. It's not a very wide lake, but it is a really, really long lake. And it was an important step on the portage between Montreal and New York, connecting 2 different water systems. Now, for some of that journey, you had to carry your boat over land. It wasn't super convenient, but it was really the only way to get between those 2 towns. Lake George was the super highway where you could actually get on the water, nice calm water at that, and get quickly north to south or south to north. So controlling Lake George was controlling a significant leg on the journey between between Canada and between the Atlantic Ocean.